And we're here. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good striking hour of midnight, wherever the hell you are. Must be midnight somewhere. Um, what, about 2 hours off the coast, off the Atlantic coast there. Must be midnight. So I wonder how many people, I doubt anybody is listening 2 hours off the Atlantic coast, but I have no idea. Anyway, good evening. I warn you in advance. Our son has a friend of his over. They are all upstairs, wife and young people, and everybody is up there horking down Mexican food. And there will probably be moments of shouting and yelling that will drift down in the background. But I like to think that it will just add to the ambiance of my presentation. So, because otherwise you might think, oh, he's clearly a crazy man sitting in a house all by himself. But no, honestly, people live with me. They by choice. I mean, I'm not even like talking about, the ones that are chained down in the crawl space. I'm talking about other people. Of course, they don't know about the ones who are chained down in the crawl space. Anyway, so good evening. Just to let you know, if sudden bursts, my family is many things. Quiet is not one of them. So I thought I would warn you ahead of time in case you hear loud shrieks coming down in the background. That is not the people in the crawl space. They are all gagged, duct tape. Wonderful stuff. Anyway, so what else do I need to talk about tonight? Nothing really. As I mentioned at the 2 o'clock reading, we have everybody in the household is now through the post-vaccination period, so we are all technically allowed to do normal things again within reason. We still obviously are wearing our masks when we go into stores and restaurants, until we get a table, and we're not going out all that much. I don't want to make it sound like it's a 24-hour party or something, because it certainly isn't that. And it will take a while. Not that we ever did do the 24-hour party thing, but it will take a while before we're anywhere near being that comfortable with the outside world again. But we are here, and we are happily moving through the what we hope are the last stages of the pandemic. And other than that, just working on stuff. I'm working on the Navigator's Children. I mentioned last night or earlier this morning, however it falls out for you in your particular time zone, but I mentioned that I am currently trying to think of a third volume name for the first half of the Navigator's Children, because I want to keep the Navigator's Children for the final volume. So one possibility is the Narrow Dark, or Narrow Dark, which is all one word, Narrowdark. It's the middle of the day and I can't talk. That is sad. At least at 2 o'clock in the morning, I have the excuse of fatigue. But anyway, and so that's among the things that I'm working on. Of course, I'm mostly working on the manuscript. I'm not saying I'm sitting around all day going, third book title. Can't do anything until I come up with the third book title. So anyway, that's what's going on. Just working. We're working. And dogs are happy tonight because son Connor, who has been staying with his friend that is now over visiting, Connor's been gone for a couple of days, and as a result, the dogs, especially the little Chihuahua that moved in with Connor a couple of years ago into his room, in our house. The Chihuahua been just frantic and they're both losing it to have Connor back in the house. The dogs are very conservative, small c conservative. They don't like changes. And our dogs do not like the changes that result from people leaving the house. To them, seeing a suitcase is like a normal person seeing a revivified corpse shambling toward them. It horrifies them. It throws everything they believe in into question. So when Connor left for a few days, there was just massive freak out, which has been going on ever since. He's back to visit and then not coming back for good till tomorrow, but back for the evening to have dinner. And so the beasts are out of their minds with excitement and all kinds of things, and they've been climbing all over us and oh God, they're so happy and so excited. And then he's going to go away again and they're going to blame me. Yes, they will blame me. Anyway, so that's what's going on. I'm just about to start reading. I have another idea, which is that I've decided, not decided, but I'm considering, this is a completely different thing. Instead of doing, besides the reading, which I am intending to keep doing, certainly until we finish this book, but probably a great deal longer than that. It's a question of whether I can still keep doing the 2 different times. But I'm also thinking about doing another kind of a broadcasty thing, maybe not live, but where I would just spend 20 minutes, half an hour, at least once a week, talking about things that I find interesting and exciting, especially because I am a very, very old person now, and you can never tell when some weird old person disease, like, say, for instance, an eagle dropping a turtle on my head, which is, I think, what scotched, was it Aeschylus or Diogenes? Anyway, one of those people. It might have been Zeno. I don't know. Anyway, some old Greek guy got scotched by having a turtle dropped on his bald head. So any number of these kinds of senior citizen mishaps could happen to me. So I feel I must put a lot of my thoughts onto the internet now while I still have them. And that therefore I can also continue to annoy people even after I'm gone, which to me is vitally important. One's annoyance value should not drop simply because one is no longer physically present. And thank God we have the internet and the possibility exists. So, and in that sort of spirit, if I do such a thing, I'm going to call it, I'm not finished yet, because first of all, it's kind of a comment, see, on like I'm not dead. But it's also the most common phrase you hear in our household, where everybody constantly wants to talk and everybody is constantly interrupting everybody else. And so one of the clarion calls of any social evening in the Beale Williams household is, I'm not finished yet. Wait, you interrupted me. Anyway, so I'm just mentioning that in passing. And I think it would be fun to just do a show and talk about books and records and comics and political things that interest me and stuff like that. So, but I'll let you know if I decide to go ahead and do that. I don't have a lot of extra time right at the moment, but I think it would be fun. And it would also give me more scope, since the reading is just meant to be reading. And anyway, so let me say hi to those of you who've already signed in on the magic blackboard, or whatever the hell this little thing is in my sidebar here. Kelly. Hello, Kelly. Good evening. Timothy. Cheers. Good to see you too. Nancy. Hello. How's it going? Going well, actually. Jerry, the Unangsta. The Unangsta. Anyway, good to see you too, bud. Claudia, greetings to you too. Jared, spry. That's a nice word. Kind of a euphemism for manic. So yeah, I am kind of spry tonight. Felina, hello. Happy to see you. Happy Sunday. Emily, good to see you. Glad you're here for the fresh hot fiction. It is right off the forebrain. Actually, no, it's not. It's already a 20-year-old book, which is why we've been talking about this as the 20th anniversary of Shadowmarch. But it's rewarmed. It's freshly rewarmed by the mere fact that I am reading it. And it's almost new to me because I don't remember it worth a ding-dang anymore. So anyway, Medardo, hello. Yes, you have elections for Congress in Mexico and half the number of governors. Wow. So here's fingers crossed for some good results. And I wish the best, obviously, for our southern neighbors. I really do. I've been to Mexico many times. I was treated brilliantly there. Of course, it helped that I actually speak Spanish and didn't expect everybody in someone else's country to speak my language. I remember just a brief story. Medardo, I think, will probably recognize this with a wince because there are a lot of people like this. One of the first times I ever went down to Mexico, which was down into Baja, I met a lot of people who were American expatriates living in Baja. And you would meet them on the beach and they would recognize you as another American. These are mostly older people. And they would be very chatty and friendly and seemed like perfectly nice people, except somewhere during the conversation, so many of them would wind up bitching and complaining that the locals that they had to deal with didn't speak English. And this just gobsmacked me. I was absolutely flabbergasted to hear people complaining who had moved to somebody else's country that the people who already lived in that country, whose country it in fact belonged to, whose country it was, wouldn't learn the language of these people who'd moved into their country. And they were actually complaining about it. Oh, these damn Mexicans don't even want to speak English. Half of them don't even understand what you're saying. And I just, at the time, I think I said, I think I disagreed with him about it. But nowadays, I would just say, are you out of your freaking mind? Have you completely lost it? I mean, what's wrong with you? Are you brain damaged? I think I was a little politer back then and tried to say, well, it is their country. But I've come to realize after the 4 years that post-dated the 2016 election that there are some people that literally do not understand anything. Just don't understand. Anyway, so let me say hello to everybody else. So anyway, yes, but me dardo. Buen suerte. Who else have I not said hello to yet? Barban, hello, good evening. Becca, good to see you too. Kristen, and you, nice to see you too. Felina, I'm glad you're not just having Lucky Charms. That Lucky Charms are okay, but if you want to make Lucky Charms a really full, healthy, satisfying meal, you got to pour beer on them. Margaret, good evening. Dark and stormy night in Florida. In Central Florida. You never have to apologize for living in Florida. There are wonderful people everywhere. We Californians have an ongoing feud, say, for instance, with Texas. Some of my literally best friends, people that I think just very highly of, live in Texas. The last thing that I would ever do is say like, oh, they're from such and such a place, as if that summed them up, because the world is full of cool people. And everywhere you live, you're going to find some jerks. Unfortunately, jerks are like cockroaches. They just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. Anyway, so please don't apologize for Florida. And I won't apologize for California because, we're full of flakes too, but we also have a lot of really good people. Anyway, Carl. Hello, Carl. Good to see you. Sonia, a pleasure. Tim. Hi, Tim, and good to see you. You're going to multitask and pack boxes. Well, I'm very impressed. When I multitask, it usually has to do with chewing while I'm doing something else. So, Jeremy, good evening from the Peninsula. Where the hell is that? No, I'm kidding. The Peninsula is where I grew up. The Peninsula is what we call the rest of the thumb. If San Francisco is the thumbnail, then this is the Peninsula, and San Jose is down here, and this is all bay. Well, this is ocean on this side, and I can't do it backwards. You'll have to believe me. But anyway, yes, Jeremy's on the Peninsula. That's where I grew up. Kenneth. Hello, Kenneth. Old person talk show. Yes, that's good. That's what it'll be. Be old person. I'll be like, oh, and these kids today and their music. Oh, God. No, actually, I'm not like that at all. I'm completely like, if it's too loud, you're just old. Tough luck. You don't get it. Everybody thinks their own music was the best, but some of us know better. It's all good. It's all great. There's new cool stuff happening all the time. There's wonderful artists and new writers and everything. I'm just glad that I still have readers, but the last thing I would ever claim was that somehow only the people who like what I like are right and everybody else is wrong. That's just embarrassing. Anyway, Mark. Oh, yes, the pups. The pups. We still have two of them, and they're still very climby. And when we have a chance to get you over here, they will climb on you again, I promise. Who else have we got here that I haven't said hello to yet? Regina, I don't think I said hello to you yet. And Greg, you're never too late because I haven't started reading yet. Although I have been babbling for a long time. So I probably should start reading. And since I think I've said hello now to everybody who wants to be said hello to, I'm sure there are literally tens of thousands of you out there who don't dare sign in because you're probably in witness protection. And I hope for a good reason. I hope you're in witness protection because you actively fought to bring down evil instead of the fact that you were evil and just cut a deal. But anyway, yeah, I have a lot of fans in public institutions of various kinds, penological and otherwise. Anyway, we are now going to read chapter 17 of Shadowmarch, the first volume. So, Chapter 17, Black Flowers. The skull. Whistling. This one is whistling. A song of wind and growing things. A poem of warm stones in the ashes. From the Bonefall Oracles. The grand and worthy nose, larger and fatter than his fellow roof-toppers, but still no taller than Chert's finger, had spoken. These strangers smelled of wickedness. There was to be no meeting with the queen. Chert didn't know whether to be relieved or disappointed. In fact, he didn't know much of anything. When he had risen this morning, the idea that he might end up on the roof of the castle with a crowd of people smaller than field mice had not even occurred to him. Most of the roof-toppers had backed away in fear from their two large visitors after the nose's pronouncement. The boy Flint looked on, his thoughts and feelings well hidden as always. Only the tiny man named Beetledown seemed to be actively thinking, his little forehead pinched into wrinkles. "A moment, masters, I beg ye," Beetledown said suddenly, then skittered across the sloping roof with surprising quickness to the grand and worthy nose, and said something to the plump dignitary in their own tongue, a thin, rapid piping. The nose replied. Beetledown spoke again. The assembly of courtiers all listened raptly, making little noises of wonder, like the cheeping of baby sparrows. Beetledown and the nose trilled back and forth at each other until Chert began to wonder if he had lost his mind, if this entire spectacle might be happening only in his own head. He reached out to the roof tiles and stroked the fired clay between his fingers, poked at the damp moss between them. All real enough. He wondered what Opal would make of these creatures. Would she put them all in a basket, bring them tenderly home to hand-feed them with crumbs of bread? Or would she chase them off with a broom? "Ah, my good woman, my good old woman, what madness have we gotten ourselves into with this stray boy?" At last Beetledown turned and trotted down the roof toward them. "I beg grace of ye once more, masters. The grand and worthy nose says they can meet our queen, but only if we can put bowmen on shoulders of each of the twain. 'Twas my idea, and I be sorrowed for its ungraciousness." He did indeed look ashamed, crushing his little cap in his hands as he spoke. "What?" Chert looked to Flint, then back to Beetledown. "Are you actually saying you want to put little men with bows and arrows on our shoulders? What, so they can shoot us in the eyes if we do something they do not like?" "'Tis all that the grand and worthy nose will agree," said Beetledown. "My word did be bond enough for the young one, but you, sir, be a stranger to even me." "But you heard him. You heard him say that he lives with me, that I am his stepfather, I suppose." Despite his anger, Chert couldn't help being a bit amused to find himself arguing with this absurd mannequin as though with any ordinary man. Then he had a sudden grim thought. Was this how the big folk felt about him? That even treating him like a real person was an act of kindness on their part? He was ashamed. A Thunderling, of all folk, ought to know better than to judge another person by his size. Is that all they wish to do? Ride our shoulders and prevent us from doing wrong? He realized he was as much worried for Flint as himself. Fissure and fracture, I am truly becoming a father, will it or not. Oh, what if one of us coughs, stumbles? I am not anxious to get an arrow in my eye, even a small one, over a misstep or a sudden chill on my chest. The fat roof-topper offered something else in his shrill voice. "The grand and worthy nose says we could bind ye, hands and feet," explained Beetledown. To his credit, he sounded a little dubious. "'Twould take some time, but then no one would fear wrongdoing." "Not likely," said Chert angrily. "Let someone tie my hands and feet. Appear on a high, slippery roof. No, not likely." He saw that Flint was watching him. The boy was expressionless, but Chert couldn't help feeling rebuked, as though he had pushed himself in where he was not wanted and was now spoiling it for everyone. Well, he thought, perhaps I wasn't wanted, but should I have simply let the boy climb the roof without a word, without trying to follow him? What sort of guardian would I be? Still, it seemed it was up to him to make things right. Very well, he said at last. Your archers may perch on me like squirrels on a branch for all I care. I will move slowly, and so will the boy. Do you hear me, Flint? Slowly. But tell your men that if one of them pinks me or the child without reason, then they will meet an angry giant for certain. Despite his irritation and fear, he was startled to realize that to these folks he was just that, a huge and fearsome giant. Chert, the giant. Chert, the ogre. I could scoop them up by the handful and eat them if I wished, he realized, just like Bramblegnag's stone boots out of the old stories. He did not, of course, share these thoughts with the roof-toppers, but sat as still as he could while two of the mice, each bearing a rider, began to climb his sleeves. The scratchy little claws tickled, and he was tempted simply to lift the bowmen and their mounts into place, but he could imagine such a gesture being taken wrongly. The faces of the little men were frightened, but determined within their bird-skull helmets, and he had no doubt their tiny arrows and pikes were sharp. What is this in aid of, by the way? He asked when the guards were in place on his shoulders. Lad, you have not told me why you are here, how you met these folk, anything. What does all this mean? The boy shrugged. They want me to meet the Queen. You? Why you? Flint shrugged again. It is like trying to chip granite with a piece of soggy bread, Chert thought. The boy, as usual, was as talkative as a root. He was distracted then by a murmur in the crowd of tiny people, the courtiers all so carefully dressed in their rude homespun, ornamented with what looked like bits of butterfly wing and flecks of crystal and metal, and feathers so small they might have come from the breasts of hummingbirds. They were all turning toward the roof crest in anticipation. Even Chert found himself holding his breath. Like the grand and worthy nose, she came riding a bird. But this one was either more successfully trained or the restraints were hidden. The snow-white dove had no band around its wings. The tiny shape atop it did not teeter in a boxy-covered saddle, like the nose, but rode directly between the dove's wings, with her legs curled beneath her, and the reins little more than a sparkling cobweb in her hands. Her gown was brown and gray, rich with ornament, and her hair was dark red. The dove stopped. All the courtiers and guards had gone down on their knees, including those on the shoulders of Flint and Chert, although Chert could feel the needle-fine point of one of the soldiers' pikes resting against his neck, perhaps as a precaution. Even the grand and worthy nose had prostrated himself. Beetledown was the first to raise his head. Her exquisite and unforgotten majesty, Queen up Steeplebat, he announced. From what Chert could make out, the Queen was not so much pretty as handsome, with a fine, strong-boned face and eyes that looked up to him without any discernible fear. Chert found himself bowing his head. Your Majesty, he said, and for a moment there was no incongruity. I am Chert of the Blue Quartz family. This is my ward, Flint. The child we know of already. She spoke slowly, but her marchland speech, although a bit musty in its sound, was far clearer than Beetledown's. We give you both welcome. The nose laboriously lifted himself from his abasement and came forward, chattering something. Our adviser says there is a wicked scent about you, the Queen reported. I smell it not, but he has always been a trusted help to our person. He is the sixth generation of those who are first to the cheese. His nostrils are of true breeding. But we also can see no wickedness in you or the boy, although we think there are other stories in the child, stories untold. Are we right, Church of Blue Quartz? Is wickedness absent in truth? As far as I know, Your Majesty, I did not even know your people still existed until an hour ago. I certainly bear you no ill will. Chert was realizing that the size of a queen meant little. This one impressed him, and he wanted to please her. Wouldn't that make Opal spit if she knew? Fairly spoken. Queen Upsteeplebat waved. Two of her soldiers sprang forward to help her down from the dove's back. She looked up briefly at the windowless stone walls all around. This is a place well chosen for a meeting, although it is long since we or our predecessors have used it for a gathering of this sort. You will forgive us, Church of Blue Quartz, but we are unused to the manner of speaking with giants, although we have practiced the old ways to be ready for just such a day, unlikely as we thought its arrival. You speak our tongue very well, Majesty. Churt snatched a look at Flint. The boy was watching, but he seemed to think this no more interesting than any other conversation between adults. Why had they invited Flint in the first place? What did they hope to get from him? The Queen smiled and nodded. Though our folk live in your shadows, and make our lives often beneath your tables and in your cupboards, generations have passed since we have spoken one to the other. But times now demand it, we believe. I'm a bit confused, Majesty. Times demand what? That your folk and ours should speak again, because we of the high places are frightened, and not just for ourselves. That which we had thought asleep, we had in our royal keeping too much knowledge to think it dead, is now awakening. That which we so happily fled long ago now reaches out again. But it is not only the who must fear it. The rapid click seemed to sound that only a squirrel or a mockingbird should be able to make. Not only who? My people, roof toppers in your tongue. The Queen nodded her head. So you must help us decide what is to be done. The boy finding Beetledown, we think we sense the hand of the sky in it. Certainly it has been a stretchingly long time since any of the giants has seen us against our will. We cannot help thinking that perhaps it truly is time for us to make common cause with your kind. Perhaps you will not listen to us, and we must flee again, although fleeing will do us little good, I fear. But perhaps you will listen. That alone will not save us, but it would be a start. Church shook his head. I don't understand any of this, I'm afraid, but I'm trying. Because the boy caught one of your people, you roof-toppers want to make common cause with the big folk? Why? Because although we have lived hidden in your shadows for long years, old night is a shadow that will cover all, and none of us will find our way out again. The royal mask seemed to slip a little. For the first time, Chert could see the fear she had hidden. It is coming, Chert of Blue Quartz. We would have guessed in any case, but the truth has been directly spoken to us by the Lord of the Peak. Watching her speak so gravely, so carefully, Chert did not doubt that she was an able ruler. Despite her size, he could not help finding her very admirable. "The storm that we have feared since before my grandmother's day is coming," said Queen Upsteeplebat. "It will be here soon." "May the gods protect us," murmured Raymond Beck, but the young man didn't sound as though he believed that they would. Ferris Vanson stared in silence at the valley spread before them. It disturbed him, too, but it took a moment for him to understand why it seemed so particularly frightening. Then he remembered the old woman's house and what he had found there. He had been only 8 or 9 years old that day, already nearing a man's height, but thin as a bowstaff. He had thought himself very brave, of course. Ferris's mother was concerned about the widow who lived on the next farm, perhaps because with her own husband so short of breath these days, and barely able to get out of bed, she had been anticipating her own upcoming widowhood. She at least had children, though. The old neighbor had none. Now they had not seen her for several days, and her goats were wandering across the green but summer-dry hills. Fearing the old woman might have become too ill to take care of herself, his mother sent Ferris, her eldest, across the dale to look in on her with a jug of milk and a small loaf. He recognized something in the silence of the place while he was still yards away, but without quite understanding what he sensed. The little wooden house was a familiar place. Ferris had been there several times with his sisters, bringing the old woman a baked festival sweet or some flowers from his mother. The old woman had never had much to say, but she always seemed happy to see the children, and would always press some gift on them in return, although what she had to spare was seldom anything more than a shiny wooden bead from a necklace that had lost its string, or a bit of dried fruit from one of the stubby trees in her dooryard. But now some new element was present, and young Ferris felt the hairs on his arms and neck rise and tingle. The wind was in the other direction, or he would have smelled the body a long time before he reached the threshold. It was high summer, and as he pushed open the ill-fitting door, the stench leaped out and clawed at his nose and eyes, sending him stumbling back, gagging and wiping away tears. Still holding the jug, generations of crofter thrift preventing him from spilling a drop of milk, no matter the circumstances, Ferris paused a few steps from the house, uncertain what to do. He had smelled death before. He knew well enough now why they had not seen the old woman lately. Still, with the first shock lessened, he felt a powerful tug, a wondering, a needing to know. He pinched his nose and stepped into the doorway. A little daylight spilled past him through the door, but the hut had only one window, and it was shuttered, so it took him a moment to see anything but darkness. She was dead, but she was alive. No, not alive, not truly, but the thing that lay in the center of the rush-strewn dirt floor, face down, he realized after staring for long moments, as though she had tried to crawl toward the doorway, was rippling with movement. Flies, beetles, and countless other crawling things he could not identify covered her entirely, a person-shaped mass of glinting, wriggling life. Other than a few wisps of white hair, there was scarcely anything to see of the old woman's body. It was horrifying, and yet, in a way, weirdly exciting as well. Although he was ever after ashamed of the feeling, the memory would stay with him forever. All that life feeding off one death. In the dim light, the old woman seemed to be dressed in glittering black armor, something like the caparison of light he had heard the priest speak of on festival day, the raiment in which dead heroes would be dressed when they went to meet the gods. "What is it, Captain? Are you ill? What's happened?" Vanson shook his head, unable to answer Colum Dyer's question. It had been a strange day already, full of weird discoveries. The patches of bright blooming meadow flowers they had found along the roadside had been strange enough, months out of season, bending nearly sideways in brisk autumn winds they were never meant to suffer. Then there had been the deserted village a few miles back, where Vanson and the others had left the road to water the horses. A very small village, admittedly, the kind that sometimes emptied when a plague struck the livestock, or the only well ran dry, but it had clearly been recently occupied. Ferris Vanson had stood in the midst of those empty houses, holding a carved wooden toy he had found, a charmingly well-made horse that no child would willingly leave behind, growing increasingly certain that something disturbing was at work all across this quiet land. Now, as he stared out at the scene before them, there was no longer any doubt in his mind that the village and the unseasonal flowers were something more than happenstance. Unlike the village, the valley before them was very much alive, but in a way more like the dead widow woman of his childhood memory than Vanson would have liked. Its colors were wrong. It was hard to say why at first. The trees had brown trunks and green leaves. The grass was yellowed, but not beyond what seemed natural for this time of the year, before the heavy rains came. But there was definitely something amiss, some mischief of light that at first glance he had thought a freak of the low clouds. It was a cold, gray day, but he felt sure that alone could not make the valley's colors seem so bruised, so oily. As the company tramped down into the valley itself, Vanson could see that although the trees and meadowed hillsides did indeed seem to have taken on an unnatural hue, much of their strangeness was because of a single kind of plant, a brambly creeper that seemed to be choking out the other vegetation. It had made its way almost everywhere along the valley, even down to the edge of the broad Setland road. Its leaves were so dark as to be almost black, but the color was nowhere near that simple. On close inspection, he saw shades of purple and deep blue and even deeper slate gray, colors that almost seemed to move. The leaves gleamed like grapeskin after a rain, and the coiling vines seemed quietly fearsome, like sleeping snakes. A chill breeze ruffled the plants, but he almost fancied they were moving more than the soft wind should warrant, that they had a tremor of independent life, like the horrid carpet of insects in the crofter woman's house so long ago. The vines also had thorns, nasty spikes half the length of his finger. But the strangest thing of all were the flowers, big, velvety, cabbage-shaped blossoms, as night-dark as the robe of a priest of Kernios. The valley seemed to be choking in black roses. "What is all this?" Dyer asked again from a tight throat. "Never seen anything like." "Nor have I. Beck, do you recognize this?" The face of the merchant's nephew was quite pale, but also oddly resigned, as though he were seeing something in the waking world that had long come to him in evil dreams. Still, he shook his head. "No, when we were where they came, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Only the mist I told you of, the long reach of mist." "There's a house up there in the hill," Vanson said, "a cottage. Should we go look to see if someone's there?" "Those vines are all over it." Colum Dyer had not made many jokes today. He sounded like it might be a while until he made any more. "There's no one left inside. That other village had emptied without any cause we could see, so who would stay around and wait for this mucky stuff to crawl over them? No point looking, they're gone." That had been his thought, too. Ferris Vanson was secretly relieved. He had not been anxious to wade toward a deserted house through these vines that sighed and rippled in the wind. "You're right," he told his lieutenant. "We ride on, then, since we will not make camp here, I think." Dyer nodded. He, too, was happy to keep traveling. Raymond Beck had his eyes closed and seemed to be praying. They passed through the valley without speaking, looking to all sides as though riding through wild, foreign lands instead of following the familiar road to Setland. The hills leaned close, and the huge flowers bounced gently beneath the wind's unseeable fingers, leaves rubbing so that it almost seemed like Vanson and his men were surrounded by whispering watchers. To the relief of Ferris Vanson and the rest of the company, the tangle of black vines did not extend beyond the valley, although the woods beside the hilly road remained unusually quiet. What could happen to scare even the birds away, Vanson wondered. The same things that took the caravan, or am I only making worries? Perhaps whatever plague emptied that village has scattered the animals and birds too. Wild things know much we have forgotten. The lowering skies and his own mood had made an ordinary hill road look almost otherworldly. He couldn't help wondering what this land had been like before settlers. The Twilight people, he thought. If the stories are true, they were here for long, long centuries before our ancestors arrived. What did they do here? What did they think when they first saw us, the rude tribes that would have come across the water or up from the south? Did they fear us? Of course, he realized, the shadow folk would have been right to fear the new creatures, because those creatures would soon take their land from them. All this place belonged to them, once. It was a thought that had first come to him in childhood, on a day when, through inattention, he found himself a long way from home as the light began to fail in the fastness of the hills. There had been a stillness to the dales, both frightening and magical, a change in the light as though the sky itself had taken a breath and was holding it for a short while before blowing out the candle of the sun. And the dark world of 100 fireside stories had risen up in his mind like smoke. All of this was theirs, the other people, the old ones. And what if now they want it back, he thought. The court physician had said the shadow line was moving. What if this was more than the matter of a single plundered caravan? What if the Twilight people, like an eldest son returned from the wars to find his younger brothers spoiling his inheritance, had decided to take all these lands back? And if so, he thought, what of us? Pushed out? Or simply destroyed? Two of Vanson's men found her while they were out picking up deadfall for the evening's campfire. It was a tribute to the mood they were all in that although she was young and might even have been passing pretty under the dirt, there were few rough jests. They held her arms as they brought her to him, although she did not seem interested in escaping. No fear showed in her dark-eyed face, only blankness, alternating with moments of confusion and what almost seemed like flashes of secretive amusement. "Wandering," one of her captors told Vanson. "Just looking up at the sky and the trees." "She's talking nonsense," the other man said. "Do you think she's taken an injury? Or is it the fever?" He suddenly looked nervous, let go of the girl, and stared at his hands as though some sign of plague might be seen there, like a stain. There had been rumors about the sickness that had made its way into Southmarch, the fever that attacked Prince Beric, though it spared his life, but which also killed several old people and more than one small child in the town. "Leave her with me." Vanson led the girl in the ragged peasant smock a little way back from the fire, but not so far that the men wouldn't be able to see him. He wasn't so much worried about what they might think of his motives, as he was concerned with what they were all feeling, the sensation of being lost in a strange place, instead of camping beside a familiar road in the March Kingdoms on the northern edge of Silverside. The girl looked like she had been living out of doors for some time. Her matted hair and the grime on her face and hands made it hard to tell how old she was. She could have been anything from a child just reaching womanhood to someone almost his own age. "What is your name?" She gave him a calculating look from behind the tangle of her hair, like a merchant who had been offered a ridiculously low price, but suspected that bargaining might produce something better. "Puffkin," she said at last. "Puffkin!" He let out a startled laugh. "What kind of name is that?" "A good name for a cat, sir," she told him. "And she was always good until the weather changed. My Puffkin." She had the local accent, not that different from what Vanson grew up with. "Best mouser in the kingdom till the weather changed. Sweet as soup." Vanson shook his head. "But what is your name?" The girl's hands were in her lap, tugging at loose threads in her wool smock. "I used to be frightened of the thunder," she murmured, "when I was a little one." "Are you hungry?" She was shaking now, suddenly, as though beset by fever. "But why are their eyes so bright?" she moaned a little. They sing of friendship, but they have eyes like fire." It was no use talking to her. He wrapped his cloak around her shoulders, then went to the fire, dipped up soup with his horn cup, and brought it back. She held it carefully and seemed to enjoy the warmth, but she did not appear to understand what to do with it. Vanson took it from her hands and held it to her mouth, giving her little sips until she at last took it herself. It was good to be able to do a small kindness, he realized as he watched her swallowing. She held out the cup for more, and he smiled and went to get some. It was good to be able to take care of someone. For the first time in a disturbing day, and although all the mysteries were growing deeper rather than otherwise, he was almost content. The clouds had passed, moving east. Another armada of them waited above the ocean, ready to sweep in, but for the moment much of Southmarch Castle's inner keep was in thin, bright sunlight. Beric found a spot where there was no shade at all. Soaking up warmth, he felt like a lizard who had just crawled out of a dark, damp crevice. The sunlight was glorious, and for the first time in days a stranger would have realized that the keep's great towers, newly washed by rain, were all different colors, from the old soot-colored stones of Wolf's Tooth Spire to the green copper roof of the Tower of Spring, autumn's white and red tiles, summer's hammered gold ornamentation, and winter's gray stone and black wrought iron. They might all have been part of some titanic bouquet. Bryony was still indoors, finishing up her day's lesson with Sister Uta. Beric could not quite understand what more there was to learn when you were already a regent of the land. It was not as though, like a chandler's apprentice or a squire, you could aspire to bettering yourself, could you? Except for continued training in combat and tactics of war, he had finished his own formal education and couldn't imagine why he might need more. He could read and write, if not quite as fluently as Bryony. He could ride and hawk and hunt as well as his mangled arm allowed, and identify the heraldic emblems of at least 100 different families, which, as old Stefan's Ninor, the Castellan, had once told him, was very important in a war, so that one could decide who would be the best opponent to capture for ransom. He knew a great deal about his own family, starting with Anglin the Great, a reasonable amount of the history of the March kingdoms, a few things about the rest of the nations of Ion, and enough of the tales of the Trigon and the other gods that he could make sense of the things Father Timoid said when he bothered to pay attention. Beric didn't know everything, of course. Watching Bryony preside over the law courts, full of opinions and concerns about things that seemed to him to matter very little, made him feel almost an outsider. His sister sometimes stopped the day's proceedings for as much as an hour to argue with the various clerks over a fine point of fairness that she deemed important, leaving dozens of petitioners pushed back to the next day's docket, and grumbling. Better justice delayed than denied was her defense of this foolishness. He wondered if half a year ago he would have been the same, Not with law, of course, which he had always found boring in the extreme, but in ferreting out the truth behind the attack on the caravan, or even trying to make sense, or even trying to make certain of Shazo's guilt. In the early days of Kendrick's regency, Barrack had entertained ideas about what he would do if he were in his brother's place, all the things he would do better. Now he was in his brother's place, but most days, after a night of haunted sleep, he could scarcely find the resolve to walk out into the courtyard and sit in the sun. It was the dreams, of course, and the weight of his awful secrets that held him back. Not to mention the fever that had almost killed him. Surely anyone could understand that. He had almost died, but sometimes it seemed that no one would have minded much if he had. Even Bryony. No, he told himself, that's a wicked voice. That's not true. And that was another problem. Somehow the fever had not entirely gone. He had walked in his sleep and suffered with bad dreams as long as he could remember, even before the night that had changed everything for the worse. Once or twice in his childhood he had even been found outside the residence in the morning, shivering and confused. But now, almost every single night, his ragged sleep was alive with creeping things, with shadowy hands and bright eyes, and even when he was awake, they didn't entirely leave him. And the dreams seemed to get into his head and speak to him as well, telling him things that he usually did not believe and certainly did not want to believe, that everyone around him was false, that they were whispering behind his back, that the castle was full of enemies in disguise who had slowly usurped those he knew and were only waiting until their numbers were so great as to be undefeatable before doing what? He sat up, suddenly quivering in every muscle. Perhaps it's all real. Despite the unbroken sunlight, the stone warming beneath his thighs, so that he could feel its pleasant heat through his woolen hose, he had to fold his arms across his chest until the trembling passed. It was the residue of his illness, of course, nothing more. And so were the strange thoughts, the voices that plagued him. Bryony was still Bryony, his beloved, inseparable other half, and the people and things around him were unchanged. It was only the fever. He was certain of that, nearly certain. Distracted by such thoughts, he nevertheless recognized the young woman by her walk before anything else. Although her figure, displayed in a sea-green dress, was still desperately alluring, she seemed to have lost weight. Her face was thinner than he remembered, but the swaying of her hips was unchanged. He stood as she reached the center of the courtyard, where she noticed him for the first time, blinked, stopped for a moment. Prince Barrack? She put her hand to her mouth when she realized she had not made a courtesy, and quickly remedied the omission. Hello, Celia? His stepmother's maid was an awkward distance away, several yards, too far for an ordinary conversation. He wished she would come toward him. Perhaps she was afraid to approach, to intrude on his private thoughts. Please come join me for a moment. The sun is lovely today, isn't it? There, he thought with some satisfaction. Surely the famous bard Gregor of Cyan himself could not have spoken more delicately to a lady. If your highness is certain? She approached slowly, like a deer, ready to leap at any noise. The new thinness of her face made her eyes seem even larger, and he could see that under the powder they were shadowed. For the first time, Barrack remembered what Chavin said about her. You have been ill. You had what I had? She looked at him. I had fever, yes, but certain that your highness was more ill than me. He waved his hand in the manner of true nobility. Comparisons were unworthy. He was pleased with this gesture, too, and the girl also seemed impressed. How are you feeling now? She glanced down at her hands. Still a little strange, I think. Like the world is not quite being as it should. Yes? Do you understand me? I do. Although the nearness of her had narrowed his attention very strongly, he felt that he could see every tiny hair against her neck, where they spilled free from the headdress, that he could count each shining dark strand in an instant without even trying. He also felt a little strange, as though he had been too long in the sun. He looked up, suddenly certain that someone was watching from one of the rooftops, as improbable as that seemed, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Oh, are you knowing you are well again, Prince Beric?" He nodded, took a deep breath. "Yes, I suppose so. Sometimes I feel like that, too. Like the world is not quite what it should be." Her face was solemn. "It is frightening to have this feeling, yes? For me, anyway. Your stepmother thinks I am not listening to her, but it is only that sometimes I am made confused." "You will feel better," he said, on absolutely no authority but the wish to say something reassuring to a pretty young woman. "How old are you, Celia?" 17 years I have." Beric frowned a little. He wished he were older. Surely a girl who might be as much as 2 years his senior was only interested in him because he was the prince. On the other hand, she did seem content at the moment. Anyone might come to the Prince Regent's command, but she did not seem in a hurry to leave. Experimentally, he took her hand. She didn't resist. The skin was surprisingly cool. "Are you sure you are well enough to be out of bed?" he asked. "You have a chill." "Oh, yes, but sometimes I am warm, very warm," she said with a little laugh. "Sometimes I cannot even keep the blankets on me when the night is cold, and my clothes are too hot when I sleep, and I must take them off." This gave Beric a picture to think about that promised to make concentration even more difficult. "Your stepmother, she scolds with me very much for badly sleeping." She looked down and her wide eyes grew wider. "Prince Beric, you are holding my hand." He let go, guiltily sure that she had put up with it only because of his high station. He had always loathed men who used their power to compel women's surrender, had watched with disapproval as Galen Tully and other nobles, and even his own brother, took advantage of serving girls. He remembered now with some pain that only a few months earlier he had started a shouting argument with Kendrick about the treatment of one such, a pretty little lady's maid named Grenna, who Beric had admired in silence for months. Kendrick had honestly not been able to understand his younger brother's anger, had pointed out that unlike some men, he never compelled any woman to do anything by force or threat, that the girl herself had been a willing partner and had accepted several expensive gifts before the dalliance played itself out. Kendrick had also suggested that his younger brother was becoming a prig before his time, and that he would do better to concentrate on his own affairs rather than comment on those of his elders. "But you must treat them like birds," had been Beric's only confused thought, then and now. "You must let them fly, or they are not truly yours." But no one had ever been his, so what right did he have to think he knew? Meanwhile, even though he had let go of her hand, Celia had still not taken the opportunity to escape. "I did not say that holding me was a bad thing." A smile curled her lips, but she was interrupted by the appearance of someone else at the edge of the courtyard. "Beric, are you out here?" He had never been less happy to see his sister. By the way, I'm going to go a couple minutes past just to let you know. He had never been less happy to see his sister. Bryony, however, was already walking along the cobbled path toward the place where he and Celia were sitting, shading her eyes with her hand. Something was odd about her garb, but he was so frustrated with the mere fact of her arrival that he did not at first understand what it was. She hesitated as she neared them. "Oh, I'm sorry, Barrack. I didn't know you were speaking to someone. Celia, isn't it? Anissa's maid?" Celia stood and made a courtesy. "Yes, Highness. And how is our stepmother? We were disappointed not to be able to dine with her." "She had disappointment too, my lady, but she was not feeling well because of the baby that is coming." "Well, give her our best and say we look forward to another invitation, that we miss her." Barrack had finally realized what was odd. Bryony was wearing a riding skirt, split down the middle, and far too informal for court functions. "Why are you dressed like that?" he asked her. "Are you going out for a ride?" He devoutly hoped it was true and that she was going right this moment. "No, no, but it's too difficult to explain now. I need to speak with you." "I should leave," said Celia quickly. She cast a shy glance toward Barrack. "I have already left my lady's errand too long, and she will be wondering where I am." Barrack wanted to say something, but the rout had already been effected. He had been forced into surrender without a blow struck. Celia made another courtesy. "Thank you for your kindly conversation, Prince Barrack. I am happy to see that you are more well now, too." She moved off, perhaps still not her former self, but with that fine and life-enhancing sway to her walk that Barrack could only watch with immense regret. She wasn't angry I held her hand, he thought, or just putting up with it. At least I don't think so. "If you can drag your eyes away from her backside for a moment," Bryony said, "you and I have things to talk about." "Like what?" he almost shouted. "Temper, lad." Her grin flickered a little. Then her face grew more serious. "Oh, Barrack, I'm sorry. I didn't interrupt on purpose." "I find that hard to believe. See here, I may not approve of a little baggage like that, but I've said my piece once already. I love you. You're my dearest brother and friend, but I'm not going to follow you around trying to make certain you only do what I want." He snorted. "Strange, because that's how it worked out." For a moment he felt real anger. "And she's not a little baggage. She's not. You don't even know her." Bryony's eyes widened. "Fair enough. But I know you, and I know what a turtle you are." "Turtle?" "Yes, with your hard shell on the outside. But the reason a turtle has a shell is because he is defenseless on the inside. I fear that someone will get inside your shell, someone I don't trust to do right by you. That's all." He was oddly touched by her concern, but also infuriated. His twin sister thought he was helpless, that he had no defenses. It was as good as calling him simple, or worse, weak. "Just you keep out of my shell too, Bryony. It's mine after all." It came out a bit more harshly than he intended, but he was angry enough to leave it that way. She stared. It seemed she might say more about this, perhaps apologize again, but the moment passed. "In any case," she said briskly, "we have other things to talk about, and I've come to you about one of them. Father's letter." "We have another letter?" As always, it filled him with both happiness and fear. What will I be like when he returns? He thought. A chill passed through him. But what if he doesn't return? What then? All alone. No, not another letter, the last one. It took him a moment to understand. "You mean the one that came with that envoy from Hyrosol, the Tuani fellow, your friend?" She didn't rise to the unpleasant tone. "Yes, that letter. Where is it?" "What do you mean? Where is it, Barrack? I haven't read it. Have you? I didn't think so." Nor has Brone, or Ninor, or anyone else as far as I've heard. The only person who actually saw it was Kendrick. And now it's gone. It must be among some of the other things he had in his chamber. Or in his secretary, that one with the Erebor carvings on it. Or Ninor has it in with the accounts and doesn't know it. His mood darkened. That, or someone is lying to us. It's not among Kendrick's things. I've been looking. There are a lot of other matters we've got to deal with that are waiting there, but no letter from Father. But what else could have happened to it? Bryony shook her head fiercely. For a moment he saw the warrior queen she could someday be, and was sad to think he might not be around to see it. Love, pride, and anger mixed in him, swirled like the clouds blowing in overhead. Stolen by his murderer, perhaps, she said. Maybe there was something written there that someone didn't want us to see. In fact, I'm certain of it. Barrack felt a wave of dread. Suddenly, the darkened courtyard seemed an exposed place, a dangerous place, and he knew why lizards were so quick to slither back into the cracks at any sound. But he realized an instant later that his father's secret, his own secret, would not be the kind of thing that King Olin would commit to a letter, even a letter to his eldest son. Still, just the brief thought had been terribly disturbing. "So what do we do?" he asked. The day had gone sour. "We find that letter. We must." And that's where we're going to stop, because I'm not going to finish the chapter for another 15 minutes. Oh, and I can't go that long. Yuck. Anyway, loosen myself up there. All right, so with that, I am going to wrap it up for this evening, but I will be back with you. I will let you know if anything else is going to happen. I'll post it on my various social media. And at some point, as I said, I'm thinking of doing another kind of broadcast, or at least a recorded broadcast. But until then, I mean, don't worry about it. I'll let you know if anything else is going to happen. But I will be back next Sunday, 2 a.m. in the morning, my time, Pacific Daylight Time, and then 7 p.m., just like this time we've shared together now. So with that, I say again, my many, many thanks to you all for joining me and helping me to do whatever it is we're doing here. I enjoy your company, and I will see you very soon. And until that moment comes, I trust you all to take good care of yourselves and good care of those around you, and we will all live to see another day, perhaps a better day, but at least another day. All right, see you soon.